Reddit, what was your "oh crap, this person is a psychopath" moment when meeting people? Hey guys, just before we get into this one, I'd like to mention that there are a few instances and mentions of assault, and in case that's something you don't want to hear about for whatever reason, this is your chance to click off the video now. That being said, let's get into it. A kid I went to primary school with invited me to his house after school one day. Not many people talked to him because it was a private school, and he was only a student there because his dad was a groundskeeper. I didn't want to go, but I didn't want to be a jerk like everyone else, so I said yes. But I couldn't stay long. We went behind his house and there were several bare spots in the grass. Some of them a single stick sticking up in the middle, while others had a plastic thin tube poking out. He was very excited as he started digging up one of the spots with a hose poking out. He pulled up a jar with a dead baby bird in it. The hose was poked through a hole in the lid to let air in. He went on to tell me he likes burying things alive. Sometimes he seals the jar tight, sometimes gives an air hose, and even puts a little food and water in to keep them alive longer. He said you can't bury them too deep or you won't hear them trying to escape. Occasionally, he would pour water down the tubes to drown the animal. I was 8 to 10 years old at the time. I'm 52 now and it still makes me sick to think about it. We are really pulling no punches for the first story, huh? Yeah, that kid has some issues. I would like to believe that he got help and is a functioning member of society now. Admittedly, when thinking about mental health about 40 years back, I'm not the most hopeful. Story 2. I, 20F, was dating this dude, 23M, for a few months. We were getting on really well. Then we both ended up having to move for our jobs at around the same time. He wants to try long distance, so we do. We call most days and watch movies together in our off time. The time zones mess it up a little bit, but it wasn't too bad. Out of the blue one day, he just says he doesn't want to be together. I'm like, wow, okay, a little blindsided, but sure. So I start just going about normal life again and hanging out with friends, the normal post-relationship stuff. After about a month, he begs, like absolutely begs to get back together. Movie type stuff, sending flowers to me at work, sending handwritten cards almost daily across thousands of miles, even bought me a ticket to fly out and see him. I'm like, okay, whatever, I'll go and see what he has to say. Worst case scenario, I fly home. So I got a ticket for 2 days after because I just figured I could head out if he was being a jerk. He picks me up from the airport and is basically how he used to be, just telling me he missed me and he regretted it as soon as it happened and it was the biggest mistake of his life, the usual. So we stay with his family because he's like, oh, please don't get a hotel. I already feel bad enough about the whole month, just stay with us. And I thought, hey, free room and board, I guess. Everything is completely fine for the first few days, and then I get an alert on my phone. It's a hurricane warning, and they're pushing my flight for 4 days later. I'm like, crap, I need to get back to work. I only took like 3 days off. When he gets back to the house from work, I tell him about it, and he's like, oh, I know, we already started boarding up the windows. I was a little freaked out, but not too much, because I guess that's normal for big hurricanes. So the next morning, he shakes me and wakes me up and tells me to come to the living room. I was like, okay. When I do, it's him, his 2 brothers, his sister, his mom, and his dad. People I've only met on this one instance. And he has a binder. They sit me down and each of them reads a passage from the binder of why we shouldn't be together and why I need to move on, and he breaks up with me in his parents' house in front of his siblings in the middle of a hurricane power outage. Then, because of the hurricane, I was stuck there for 4 more days with these freaks. Probably not the most psychopathic person I've met, but this story is still just so strange to me. I had to post it. Story 3. Was walking my dog down a main road on lead. A lady was walking her dog off lead. Her dog stopped in the road, causing cars to stop. She had no control over it. Her dog lunged for my dog. I asked her to put her dog on a lead. She said she will stamp my dog's head and to let her dog murder mine. I knew it wasn't even worth arguing with crazy, so I carried on. She then set her house on fire 2 weeks later with her children inside. Luckily, they were okay, but yeah, madness. Story 4. This story makes me mad. So one time a friend came over and brought a new friend with them. Seemed like a nice guy. He was quiet and kept to himself. I was a young single woman and far too trusting of people at the time, I think. So my friend mentions that this guy has recently just got out of prison. I ask him what he went away for. He then proceeds to tell me that he and his friends had followed a young girl into a local park and assaulted her using various sharp objects they found on the ground. They each got extremely long sentences. His happened to be 12 years. Just butting in the middle here and saying, 12 years? Not enough for this. I hate you. Anyway, continuing. What made everything worse was that he ends the story with the fact that she took her own life because she couldn't live with what they did to her. Needless to say, he was never allowed around my home again, and I had a very stern talk with my so-called friend. Edit to clarify, the guy friend, I got rid of him quick. I felt unsafe and had to do so over a short time period. The fact that he associated with such scum, and I was a young lady living alone at the time, was the reason he only got a stern talking to. Story 5. It was an Uber driver. My wife and I took an Uber down to the bars one weekend. Once he picked us up, I could easily tell he was on something. While we were crossing a bridge on the interstate, about halfway to our destination, he says, "Isn't it crazy that I could just swerve off the road and end us all right now?" I told him to get off on the next exit and canceled the ride. I also reported him to Uber, so hopefully nobody has to get in a car with that lunatic again. Now, Uber driver man, I get it. Intrusive thoughts happen. Fair. Saying them is something else. Yikes. Story 6. At a party in high school or just after it, we were doing late-night juvenile things like Truth or Dare. I knew most people there pretty well, except the new boyfriend of my friend's sister. I'm not entirely certain how it came up, but he admitted to the entire group he had assaulted a dog. We were drunk and high, but everyone sobered up pretty quickly with that. We were too young to know what to do with the information, but we all just shut up and quickly left the party. She broke up with him not long after. I can't imagine doing something that awful to a helpless animal, but admitting it to a group of strangers seemed downright sociopathic. I was glad to never see his face again. Story 7. She came late to our date, immediately ordered a drink and burger, then told me she was late because of a family thing. Before the burger arrived, she mentioned she would have to cut our date short because she was having a family dinner, and I was like, okay, all good. Then she told me the craziest thing had happened. Her sister met a dude on Tinder, and they ended up going to a family barbecue, and it ended up with them married. Before her burger even arrived, she said, "Wouldn't it be funny to pull a prank on my family? Like, you and me went to my family barbecue and let everyone assume we were really hitting it off? They would totally think we're gonna get married too." I'll admit, I'm also the psychopath in this story because I went. Good mashed potatoes. She spent all night introducing me as her future fiancé, and I had to take a Tinder break after that. Story 8. At a party once, I met a friend of a friend who worked as a nurse at a local hospital. She was of the sort who would sigh heavily and use the unique stresses of her job to bring her the attention she was looking for. She took the spotlight with pleasure and started talking about how hard her job was. When I asked if there were things that she liked about her job, she beamed and explained that she worked primarily in maternity. However, her anecdotes had nothing to do with mothers or infants. She primarily spoke of how wonderful it was to be in charge of these women's lives. She explained how fragile they were in those moments, and how even after delivery she was the only one on the floor for hours who would be able to forecast if there was going to be a life-changing complication. She absolutely glowed as she explained how these people's lives were in her hands. The conversation steered in other directions amongst partygoers, but she reclaimed it on the topic of high school experiences. She shared an anecdote on how she was rejected for an advanced choir position, and blamed it solely on the poor judgment of the instructor. Years later, she got to sing at the instructor's funeral. I'll never forget the pride she took in having control over other people's lives. It struck me as the most basic display of evil. Story 9. That seems to be somewhat common in the nursing field. I dated a nurse that helped physically and mentally disabled children. She turned out to be a nightmare. After sharing a long list of experiences I'd had with her to a therapist, they deemed her a narcissistic sociopath. Probably should have bailed when she told me a story while laughing about catching her ex-husband in bed with another woman, and her first instinct was to grab a metal baseball bat and start beating him and the other woman with it. I also found out later she has a repeated history of assaulting her partners, and then calling the police to say she was the one assaulted, and giving herself marks before the cops came, doing everything in her power to take ownership of any of their belongings she has access to. I could go on for days about the unhinged stuff she's done. Story 10. After moving to a new city a few years ago, my best friend came to visit. We're both 30-something dudes. We were out at a bar when a guy asked to sit with us because there weren't any free tables outside. Fine. Being polite, we start talking to the guy. He told us he was a truck driver just stopping overnight in town, and at some point mentioned he was ex-military. Now, from there, things began to get strange, but slowly, like the proverbial frog in water before being brought to a boil. Not only was he in the military, but he had a brother. It might have been a twin, I can't recall, who was in the CIA embedded in Russia. My friend and I also gradually got the sense this guy was a little too interested in us. We eventually closed our tabs and decided to go to a different bar, but the guy stuck with us. telling increasingly tall tales about his time in the military. He eventually confessed there was no brother. He was the spy who'd been embedded in Russia. What struck me was how even though his stories got more and more ridiculous, his demeanor was deadly serious, if a bit overwrought, and the intensity was starting to make my skin crawl. Not only that, but he was starting to pick fights with other people at the bar, deliberately being belligerent. Over time, he started to radiate this menacing air that hadn't been apparent when we first started talking to him. He didn't get angry directly at us, but it was like he was demonstrating how scary he could be and suggesting we stay on his good side. Finally, he took me aside and slipped into a not very convincing Russian accent. Alas, he was never a spy for the US, he was a double agent, a one-man Russian sleeper cell, but he couldn't bear lying to me, he had to come clean. Even though we had open tabs at the bar, my friend and I waited until the guy went to the bathroom, abandoned our cards, and dipped post-haste. Story 11. I've been a public school teacher for a decade. I've only ever been scared of one student. First of all, this was in my first few years of teaching. The student was of myth in my school. I taught at an alternative school for students that had been expelled from every other school, but overall, in my experience, my students were chill. They weren't good students, but if you met them at their level, things were usually fine. The exception was JT. JT was a sophomore when I met him, but at that point I didn't teach him. But boy, did I hear about him. Somehow his mom was able to game the paperwork and education system enough that this kid was unpunishable. Everything was technically covered under a litany of 504 plans and IEP paperwork. So much so that this kid literally pushed an 8-month pregnant teacher down, and he was back 2 weeks later. He could literally punch a kid in the mouth and be back 2 days later, and because of this, he was just a massive problem. The first terrifying discovery for me was that his mom was very vocal about not wanting him home because she was scared of him. She had a good reason to be. JT, as a small child, tried to murder his family by lighting their house on fire, specifically trying to murder his brother by duct taping him to his bed while he slept. His brother survived but had horrific burns, but somehow that didn't stop him from supporting his almost murderous brother. JT was ruthless, but he was also about 5'4", and his Krugered brother was about 6 foot and much physically stronger. I finally had the pleasure of teaching JT in his senior year. He had approximately 10 credits, all gym-based, and was nowhere near graduation. My first note was that this is the only kid I've ever met that just had nothing going on behind his eyes. He was shark-like. He never smiled or laughed unless someone got hurt. Cruel for cruelty's sake. One day, JT wasn't there, which frankly was odd. He had a great drug business going at school and he only had to avoid one cop. The next day, we found out why he wasn't there. JT murdered a kid, shot him in the face for $12 and a little bit of weed. His lawyer tried to get his sentence lowered by arguing that it was technically his first offense, since everything else happened when he was a kid. He got 25 to life. Story 12. I'm a kindergarten teacher and have been for years. I have the one kid, nothing behind his eyes, truly takes pleasure in seeing people hurt. He was like a cancer in this classroom. He loved nothing more than to create scenarios in which he could witness other kids having their feelings hurt. Several times a week, he would have a student crying in hysterics. He loved getting children to turn on each other. He would lie to one kid about something another kid did. And he loved to see kids left out and feel sad and alone. It's like he literally fed off their anxiety. His parents were also super bizarre. They adopted like 6 kids of various genders and races, but all the kids were the same age. Then the mom would make reference to them being twins when they were very obviously not. I told my teacher partner that if I had to guess one child in my history of teaching would end up on TV for a violent crime, it would definitely be this child. I forgot to mention that at our class Christmas party, he threw a full cup of scalding hot cocoa at my teaching partner's chest. It splattered and burned the surrounding children and gave my teaching partner a very bad burn. When I asked him what he was thinking, he said, "I was done with it." I hope he doesn't end up murdering someone someday, but I could totally see it. No emotion, no empathy, no conscience. When this sort of stuff presents in a kid so young, it makes me wonder how much of this is just in the kid or how much of it is a terrible early life. I've always sort of wanted to believe that it's something that the environment teaches you for whatever reason, right? It's like a defense mechanism or a reaction to being abused or whatever, but sometimes it really does seem like. Story 13. My ex-fiance told me that if I were to get pregnant with a girl before a boy, he would push me down the stairs and make me miscarry so we could have a boy first as many times as it took. We broke up, and afterwards he convinced me to talk things over with him. I got into his car and he proceeded to calmly explain to me that it didn't matter if I took him back or not, as he headed to the expressway. I asked him where we were going and he remained absolutely silent. He started gaining speed, but the pitch in his voice never changed when he finally spoke and began a diatribe about our love and how we would be together forever. her, no matter how many people wanted to pull us apart, and no matter if I saw it yet or not. I again asked him where we were going, and he said a neighboring state, where no one would know or find us, with a very creepy smile, one that lives in my mind to this day but I can't recreate. All very calm. I had to call my mother and she had to talk him down, beg him to bring me back home. Story 14. My friend found a psycho, met her at the bar and ended up taking her home. She decided it should be more than just a one-night stand and suggested a date the following weekend. He obliges. Their first date was meeting her parents, where she told them how they were going to spend the rest of their lives together, where they were going to buy a house, the names of their 2 children, etc. He dated her for about a month, and after they broke up, she started stalking his friends, not him, his friends. She would somehow find out where we would be and threaten us with lawsuits for, quote, ruining her life. Story 15. I, through a buddy, met this dude we all called Ranger Dave. He was a 100% ex-Army Ranger with multiple deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, multiple heroic medals, appeared all around kinda nice guy. I knew him tertiarily on and off. I'd see him driving by or bump into him in the grocery store, coffee shop, etc. He lived in town and for all outward appearances and actions, was normal. One day, walking home from lab, he pulled up to me and offered me a ride home. He knew where I lived and had been there a few times for pre-games or hangouts, so whatever, I said sure. Hopped in. Ranger Dave and I pulled up to an uncontrolled intersection, a 4-way intersection without stop signs on any side. More of a whoever gets there goes kind of thing. Really easy to navigate, not hard to see every direction. Well, for whatever reason, Ranger Dave lost his crap. The poor person who had just pulled up to the intersection before us started to go again as they should have, no issues at all. Freaking Ranger Dave floored it. Full throttle Dodge Ram 8 freaking cylinders, smashed the crap out of a Toyota Prius. Easily 0 to 45 in less than a second, full T-bone smasheroo. He flipped the hell out. Screaming, veiny neck, monster. I hit my head on the windshield, split my forehead open. Remember, I'd just gotten into the truck. No time to put on a seatbelt. I, concussed, noped the hell out of that scene after making sure the idiot didn't maim or murder the old little lady who had no idea what just happened. I gave her my info, told her I had hopped into his truck seconds before a quick ride home, then called the police. He left, just drove off. I kept seeing him around. Screw Ranger Dave. Story 16. I was casually dating a guy for roughly 5 months. I moved into a new apartment and had sent him pictures of the interior before I moved. He went on a trip to Scotland and got upset that I wasn't answering his FaceTimes in the middle of the night. I decided I wasn't interested in pursuing anything further because of his persistent pestering and insecurities. I had moved in and was working on unpacking when suddenly I got a knock at my door. He found where I was living with just a picture of the hardwood floors and some windows. I don't have my location for my photos turned on, so there's no way he could have found it from something simple. He saw absolutely nothing creepy with it and proceeded to push the door and beg me to let him inside. I promptly shut and locked the door, then made sure he heard my shotgun cock. He left and I haven't heard from him since, thankfully. Story 17. One day I was driving home from work around 3 in the afternoon, bright sunny day. I see a man hitchhiking from the one town that is south of my town, so I figure I'll pull over and give the guy a ride. So he jumps in and he's got a knapsack on, throws it in the back, thanks me so much, and off we go. So we're chatting and he tells me he's trying to hitchhike about a 7-hour drive north of where we are right now. I tell him I can take him about 45 minutes north. All's good, start asking why he's going there, and he says, oh yeah, he wants to go camping up that way. He's got to retrieve something. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool. What are you going for? He goes, well, the police are after me and they've been trying to find me for quite a while, but I just keep changing bodies and that way they can't find me. So I've left a body up near this town and I'm going to switch into it, and then once I do, I can hitchhike across the country safely. This guy did not change his voice, change his look. He didn't all of a sudden go Mr. Super Creepy. It's not like he was trying to fake me out. He said it like it was the most normal thing in the world. So now we're out in the middle of the countryside and I have to keep going until we get into my town before I can let this guy out. Normally, I would have driven through town and let him out on the other side, but I pulled right downtown and said, sorry, I've got to go into this store, you'll have to jump out here. I went into the store and waited for him to walk away. Fortunately, he didn't murder me or take my body. Story 18. I walk my dog at the same time daily. You tend to bump into the same people, routines and all that. See a woman with a Bernese mountain dog on a rope lead. I haven't seen her before, and this dog is at least twice her size, so I'm a bit cautious about opening the gate to the park. Assure myself it's fine, she can control it, and I'm being needlessly anxious. As I open the gate and go through with my Jack Russell, I watch the mountain dog bolt towards us barking. The woman holding him gets pulled off her feet and lands on her shoulder hard with a loud groan. Quickly scoop my dog and go back through the gate, slamming it shut behind me, as I can hear this woman yelling over and over, "It's okay, he's friendly, he just wants to say hello," as this big bastard is jumping up at the gate barking and snarling. As I back away from the gate, she yells up from the ground, "You're a freaking coward! Don't be such a coward, say hello, he just wants to play with your dog." Such a surreal turn of events. I have no idea what the hell was going on with her or that hellhound, but decided to walk home quickly with my dog and leave her on the ground with a snarling hound at the gate. This was about 3 years ago, but I still wonder what the heck this woman's plan was, and did she just want me to get attacked? Story 19. A few months back, I ended things with a close friend. We had known each other since sophomore year of high school, so we practically grew up together. A little while into our friendship, he was very dependent on relationships, and when they would end, he would spiral really badly. One relationship in particular made him absolutely crumble. I would help through the grief process, but it became intense and his need for comfort became suffocating. Even his own mother would call me to comfort her son, and if I had no time or just wasn't comforting enough, he would lash out and yell. He even called me once to show me how he ripped and stabbed his ex's belongings that were left at his house. At that moment, I began to see his true colors. One day we were talking and I'd brought up a past argument that I thought was funny. He got mad and lashed out saying, "Well, I didn't know it would hurt your feelings." It took me aback and just something clicked in me that I couldn't have a person like that in my life. Months passed and I'm approached by a friend who's friends with him. She ends up telling me that he has a police report and has been reported to his college for spreading child content of his ex. It was a shock to me because I had no idea he dated a minor. That's when I realized, oh crap, he's a psychopath. Story 20. My best friend's sister had recently met a new man. She was the kind of woman who had terrible taste in men. She had left a relationship with a wonderful man whom she had her first child with. They separated right when she gave birth. She met this man when her son was 6 months old. I was very close with this family. They all went on and on how wonderful this man was and how great he treats her and her son. They kept wanting me to meet him. I've had a hard life and met many people in my day. My grandmother used to say, "If you've never met evil, consider yourself lucky. You will meet lots of people in life, and always trust your gut. If you ever meet evil, you will know it." I never understood what she meant until the day I met this man. My best friend's sister stopped by her other sister's house where we happened to be. They called me to come say hello and meet the new boyfriend. When I came, they introduced him and I shook his hand. I will try to describe the feeling as best I can. The moment I shook this man's hand and looked into his eyes, I felt almost sick. A rush of dread and panic and the feeling of urgency to get away from him all at once. His smile and words and overt friendliness did not match the black, cold eyes staring at me. He said very little about himself, no matter the questions I asked. He deflected and answered a question with a question. After he left, my bestie asked what I thought. I replied with, "Do you really want to know?" I ended up saying, "He seems nice. Almost too nice and perfect. In fact, if you really want to know, something is off. And I feel like I just met the devil in disguise. She needs to get away from him because that is no man. He is a monster." My friend was like, "You got all that just from meeting him?" I assured her it's just my opinion and I can't explain why my gut said this man is evil. 2 months later, that man murdered her 8-month-old child. He was angry at my friend's sister for taking her son to his dad and getting Christmas pictures taken with her ex and his family for their Christmas card. He was angry that the baby's grandmother asked her to be in one of the pictures with the family. He murdered an 8-month-old child to hurt her because he was jealous of the relationship she had with her son and because she co-parented. OP, I just hope I have someone like you in my life who would tell me that sort of thing. If someone I know ever gets a really bad vibe about someone I'm related to at all, I hope they tell me. But shout out to your instincts. Story 21. I once visited someone's house for dinner and during the meal the husband suddenly said, "I think Hitler had the right idea about the Jews," and his wife nodded in agreement. I didn't even react immediately. I was just shocked someone would say that. I guess they were testing the waters, but after my shock wore off, I went right at them and they clearly didn't like it. I was never invited to visit or speak to them again. Well, OP, not getting to talk with people like that is no big loss. If that's their testing the waters, I don't want to know what they actually believe. Story 22. Went on a date with a guy almost 5 years ago. I just gotten divorced and was excited. So I was definitely missing some huge red flags I would never miss now. He told me he had pet turtles as a kid and wouldn't clean their tanks ever. The water became so filthy that the turtles were just living, breathing infections, to the point their eyes were just gone, swimming around blind in pain in their own feces. He would just watch and basically laugh at them. It was super disturbing. He laughed while telling me this story. I genuinely believe he told me this because he thought I would also find it hilarious. This was one of the many, many red flags from this dude. Ended up being married with kids and everything too. Side note, I've noticed a lot of people saying these random confessions from these psychopaths come out without being prompted, just so randomly, and that's honestly the scariest part. Like, they can literally talk about these things to complete strangers they are supposedly wanting to impress, hear themselves out loud talking about it, and cannot sense how absolutely bat-crap crazy they sound. Story 23. I was at a party playing beer pong. Some dude came up to me and my buddy, then asked if we knew what it was like to end a man. Obviously, we said no, but laughed it off thinking he was just a drunk like we all were. Then his eyes changed. He said something about power or whatever, and I slipped away. Talked to someone else at the party who knew the guy, and he said, "Yeah, he was in the Marines, and he was never right after coming back. Probably wasn't born a psychopath, but unfortunately became one in the desert." Story 24. My brother and I hung out in a small town as teenagers. We were couch surfing and living out of our vehicle. We had another friend who tagged along with us as his home life was rough too. One weekend, while partying, we met a girl named Sam. She was attractive and our age. She asked us if we would pick her up from her house the following day. Our friend liked her and asked us to pick her up, so we did. She hung out with us for the following couple of days. We swam at local rivers and camped out. Everything seemed normal until last night. Sam mentioned to us she had a baby recently, but the baby died of SIDS when it was only a couple days old. That changed the mood of things, but we felt terrible for her. Then she brings up her stepmom. She told us that she lived with her grandpa, where we picked her up, because her father kicked her out of their home in a neighboring state. She said her mother fell down steps and died of a brain aneurysm, but her father told everyone that she pushed the stepmother. She very coldly, no emotion, explained that the family on her dad's side all thought she pushed the stepmother down the steps. She never denied it, though. After these conversations, we very quickly decided we would take Sam home the following day. We dropped her back off at the house we picked her up at, and we watched her walk through this white gate into the backyard. Several hours later, we found Sam's bikini top in the back seat. We drove back to her house to return it, knocked on the front door, and an older man answered. We presented Sam's bikini top to return it to her. He claimed to not know a Sam, and he had no granddaughter living with him. We tried describing her looks, and nothing. He had no earthly clue what we were talking about. Never heard from or saw her again. Story 25. I met a guy in middle school. No idea why he made me feel weird. He was cute, all the girls wanted to know him. He gave me just really creepy vibes though. I even tried to befriend him because I knew he was being bullied by some guys. We talked, but he was very off. His language about the girls in our class bothered me. Just stuff like, "I bet she gives good head," or "I wonder what her mouth feels like." We were 13. I felt like, why is this dude talking to me about other girls? He never said anything violent, but later, I found out he murdered some teen girl. He was 30. Story 26. I was homeless for a few months in 2008. To pass the time, some days I read a wide variety of books from the local library. One night, sitting in a bed at the shelter, the guy who got the one next to mine that night asked about a book I was reading. It was about the history of Christian martyrs. He asked to borrow it, and I thought, sure, why not? As soon as I give it to him, he mentions how much he gets off on this kind of stuff, torture, death, etc. I made sure to avoid him from that day onwards. Story 27. Tried to date a year after my divorce. Very big mistake. We met on a dating site and talked for about a month before I felt ready to meet in person. I don't know what I was thinking, but I invited her to my place to talk, watch a movie, and eat. I told her I wanted to take it slow. I was in no rush, and I had a few medical issues I dealt with at the time, so I only wanted someone to go on dates with and to get to know. Well, she wanted to get physical, and I respectfully declined. She didn't like that, and she said she wanted to go, and I said okay, and I was sorry. I walked her out, and an hour and a half later, it was 1:30 a.m. I heard banging on my door. I opened it and saw two cops and her behind them crying. She called the police saying I stole her dog during our date. I have two mini Aussies, had them both since they were puppies. I also have PTSD from the military, and for some reason, me and cops never get along even if I'm nice. So my fault I got combative and they wouldn't listen to me, until I showed them my phone's pictures and that I had thousands of my dogs. They finally let me show them their dog files with all my vaccinations and vet visits. Thank God my older dog has a lot of medical issues and I keep lots of documentation. The cops escorted her away and I ended up getting a restraining order, blocked her on everything, and moved to a new place. It scared the crap out of me, and my dogs are the only ones who kept me going through my divorce and medical struggles. I stopped dating altogether at this point. I'd rather to learn to love myself and be alone with my dogs, and no one is allowed to come to my new place. I do see a therapist who's helping me in my journey. She wants me to not give up on dating, but I'm just not ready yet. It's been 3 years since that incident. Story 28. I was helping a friend after she had an outpatient surgery, but still needed eyes kept on her just in case. Her boyfriend at the time started talking with his friend that he invited over, knowing she was having the surgery, about assaulting her and how she wouldn't know any better because of the drugs. Also, they talked about stealing her pain pills. They thought I couldn't hear them talking in the living room, but I don't know if it would have made a difference if they knew I could hear them or not. I did not leave her side until I knew she was fully conscious. When I told her what he said, she wasn't even surprised and sent me home. We are no longer friends for different reasons. This is just such overtly disgusting behavior. I don't know how someone can discuss this with another human and have the other person be on the same page. Like, it blows my mind to think that people are that screwed up about this. About anything, really. Story 29. My sister's ex. He tried to give my other sister alcohol and convince her to go to a hotel with him. She was 15. Coworker. He comes in and he's tired because he had to take his daughter's cat to the vet. It had been attacked by a fox and nearly died. He complained that he could have saved a lot of money if he just spent 15 cents on a bullet. So he only saved the cat because his daughter would have been upset if it had died. I found out more about him by Googling him, and I'm convinced he's secretly a white supremacist as well. Ex-friend. Told my boyfriend I was cheating on him with 2 other women. Neither of them are gay or bi. I don't know if she made up the lie or got it from someone else. This absolute female dog also wore a white dress and a veil to someone else's wedding. Story 30. In high school, I met a male friend through a female friend. We had lunch together, and eventually my female friend switched to homeschooling, which left just us two. We became pretty close, but still didn't know each other personally until he asked me for a ride home one day. He lived about 5 minutes from me, so I said yes. About 2 minutes into the drive, he starts telling me about himself, but in a more trauma-dumping kind of way. He explained how he has a fursona, he's a furry, which I thought was weird, but I tried not to judge. He seemed like a cool person overall. Another 2 minutes goes by and he starts spilling about his experience in the mental hospital and why he was there. He told me he was admitted because he had a plan to murder 2 different girls. I don't remember the details of what he said, but I know that the adrenaline kicked in for me because I was a girl driving alone with someone who allegedly wanted to murder people, in the past at least. I remember wondering if he was going to lead me somewhere to murder me, since he was directing me to his house instead of just giving me an address. He ended up actually taking me to his house, where he hugged me and handed me like $8 for the ride. Scariest moment ever for little high school me. Story 31. So my cousin told me this wild story about what happened at her job. She had a coworker who seemed fine at first, but over time, his behavior started to raise serious red flags. He was incredibly charming and seemed to get along with everyone well, but it quickly became clear that he was using his charm to manipulate people. He would take credit for others' work, sabotage team projects to make himself look better, and even leak confidential information to competitors. One time he intentionally messed with presentation equipment and files just to undermine a colleague, and then took credit for saving the day. Eventually, after a series of incidents, HR had to step in. They couldn't disclose specific details about his condition due to confidentiality, but they did reveal that his behavior was linked to a serious personality disorder. They fired him, and the whole team was left in shock. My cousin said it was a real eye-opener and made everyone more cautious about who they trusted in the office. Story 32. I have a coworker who is insane and says wild things on almost a daily basis. Recent highlights include 1. Bragging about stealing a car. 2. Proudly declaring she won't sleep with a man who showers regularly. She, quote, needs them to stink. 3. Weekly stories of road rage altercations on her way to and from work. Sounds like they've been escalating recently too. 4. Buying into almost every wild conspiracy theory you can think of. 5. Defending famous adult men who are predators because, quote, if I were a 13-year-old girl, I would totally be throwing myself at him too, so I don't really consider that a victim. That's something I really would have wanted at that age. To top it off, she said almost all of these things in front of very important clients. I truly don't understand how she still has a job. Like I said, these are just recent occurrences, and only scratch the surface. My fellow coworkers and I are constantly in awe of the crap that comes out of her mouth. OP, the stuff you've decided to throw into that list is really, I don't know. They just don't all have the same vibe to them, you know what I mean? Like one of them, proudly declaring she won't sleep with someone who doesn't stink. Weird. Sure, weird. And a weirder thing to bring up in front of work colleagues. But that, mixed with the last one, defending predators, is crazy. We're talking like 3 degrees of separation in levels of insanity. Horrifying. Story 33. Interviewing a crazy rich 16-year-old for an internship. His dad was a trustee, and he never broke eye contact or smiled once. I asked about his hobbies, and he said, I run a small import-export business for restaurant equipment," without changing his tone at all. We were told we had to hire him, and yeah, he was just as incompetent and resistant to feedback as you might imagine. Story 34. As a kid, I had a friend whose mom would rent out their connecting house. The man that lives there kept to himself, but seemed nice. If he saw me or my friend, he would let us pet his bird that he always seemed to have with him. Apparently, he quit paying rent, so he was kicked out. The woman who owned the house never checked if he was keeping the place decent. I offered to help clean it because I wanted to be with my friend. The mom unlocked the door and went to her house to get cleaning things, so I went in to look at the place before she got back. When I opened the door, I was met with an awful scene of dead rats everywhere. Some in traps, some with their heads just cut off, with blood and, I think, peanut butter smeared all on the floor and on the walls. I was horrified, but for whatever reason I felt like I had to look at the rest of the house because it was more of the same stuff. Trash, dead rats, and random broken things. Bathtub had rats thrown in it. The next part, though, destroys me, and I can still vividly see it. I opened a closet, and I see his bird hanging on string with all its feathers gone, obviously dead. I cried and ran out after that. For a while, I had a huge fear that maybe the guy, knew where I lived and would come for me for finding out his secret. Story 35. I used to work in a financial office in downtown San Francisco. There was a woman who worked there who sometimes ate lunch at the same time as I did, and we would chat. We had some overlapping taste in books, movies, etc., so we would talk about that. One day, she started this really serious conversation about how she thought all homeless people should be taken somewhere and shot because they were, quote, negative to society and would never be wanted or useful. I thought she was trying to be hyperbolic in some kind of jokey way for a few minutes, though that kind of shock behavior wasn't like her. After a few minutes of this, I figured out, no, that's just what she believes, and how she's comfortable enough around me to let that show. We argued about it for a while because that's a crappy, insane take, and then lunch was over. We never sat together or talked again, and I made sure of that. Story 36. I was friends with some old guy from work. We used to talk in English despite being Mexicans and used to eat lunch together. He then decides to share with me that he married his wife when he was 40 and she was 13. I said out loud, in shock, freaking gross. I hated his guts after that, and told on him with everyone I could. Story 37. I live in a nursing home, and yesterday I saw a 60-something-year-old male resident coming out of a much older blind woman's room, asking him if he was lost. He went ballistic, raised his cane in the air and threatened to bash my head in, actually assaulted me with his other hand, and I had to block his attack as I was trying to record on my phone, and assured me that if he decided to hit me, I'd be dead. Psychopathic? Possibly. Actually crazy? No. Just your standard abusive older male jerk. An unfortunate reoccurrence in my life thus far. I had PTSD flashbacks and nightmares all night in which my stepfather's face and this guy's were intertwined as they were beating the crap out of me. Decided to call the non-emergency police number this morning to report it, because management isn't in until Tuesday and that's just too far away. They're going to come talk to him and I'll be sleeping with my bedroom door locked until further notice. Story 38. In high school, I joined a certain group of friends. Two of the guys were brothers. The younger seemed fairly cool, and one of my girlfriends started dating him later on. The older brother was exceptionally creepy and edgy. Slick hair, shades, and a trench coat kind. But he had other reasons that made him a target for bullying, and this creepy persona kept people away from him. He would also send love notes and make comments on all the girls in the group's appearance. We just brushed it off and ignored it because we figured he was trying to be cringe, and he was a few years older than us. The younger brother, still dating my friend, dropped out, and his mental health was spiraling. He was starting to become extremely possessive, only spent time with his mom and girlfriend. He had auditory hallucinations, paranoia, and started doing a lot of pills and smoking insane amounts of pot his mom gave him. I found out later he was choking my friend regularly and even held a knife to my friend's parent. She tried getting him to leave his mom, that environment, get him on the prescribed medication, and surprise, surprise, he was schizophrenic. He refused to give up the drugs or his possessive mom, so my friend left him, thankfully. The older brother started feeding a younger girl acquaintance drugs and alcohol. Another friend who regularly visited their mom went over there. He walked in to see the older brother attempting to assault the younger girl. She was drugged, fading in and out. Friend got her out, and older brother got his butt beat. I guess him attempting to groom all of the younger girls in the group should have been a warning that he was bad news. A decade later, I get a call from a high school friend and he tells me to look up an article on the local news. The younger brother had a psychotic break. He stabbed a family member to death, hurt a random passerby, and charged the police when they caught up to him. Wild. We knew he was a ticking time bomb, but after he refused X's help and his brother did what he did, we washed our hands of that family entirely. Ooh, schizophrenia plus a hallucinogen such as pot, not a great mix. For those who don't know, people with a family history of schizophrenia probably shouldn't partake in marijuana or any hallucinogen, especially not at an early age. It can stimulate some things in your brain and cause early onset schizophrenia. Story 39. I, male 31, went on a date with a 28F. Went out on a first date. She showed up an hour late to a date at a nice restaurant. I decided to order when she was 45 minutes late because I assumed she wasn't coming. She was texting me every 10 minutes saying she was 10 minutes away. She shows up drunk. I ask her where she was. She says she was at the bar next door drinking with her ex, who happened to be there. She then proceeds to yell at me for ordering food without her. Then continues on to tell me that now that I'm talking to her, I'm not allowed to communicate to women unless she approves it. And if I have friends who are married or have girlfriends, she needs to vet them first before I can continue hanging out with them. I stayed mostly silent while she ranted about being super hot and no man can handle her. After I finished my meal, I said, I need to go to the bathroom. I left and never came back. I blocked her upon leaving the restaurant and never talked to her again. I've never done anything like that in my life. I always pay for the meal on the first date. But this girl deserved it. Story 40. Seemingly normal girl walked up to me in an otherwise shady part of town, making idle chit-chat. I assumed she was working her way up to bumming money or something, but she didn't appear to have a gun, and I was with my 90-pound pit bull, so I was comfortable enough shooting the breeze for a while. She casually glanced down at him and said, "That's your screw dog?" Huh? Did you say a screw dog? What does that mean? She nodded coyly. You know, a dog you screw. I got one like that and he eats me out. And she casually went into explicit detail about her bestial shenanigans with some pet she abused. While I stared at her and waited for her to burst out laughing, or maybe Ashton Kutcher to pop out from behind a car with a video camera pointed at my face. Nope, she was just a girl telling another girl, a stranger no less, the most unhinged and depraved stuff imaginable. She didn't even appear to be on any kind of drugs, although she probably should have been. Story 41. I was talking to a guy on Bumble. I live in New York, very near to where the Long Island serial murderer lived, and Gilgo Beach is 20 minutes from me, but mind you, there's dozens of beaches around me. As we were messaging at 1 a.m., I kept getting these vibes that I thought was maybe just me being dramatic. I explain how beautiful it is and I'm sitting outside enjoying the weather. He asks me if I've ever been to the beach at night. I'm like, no, not in a long time. He says, I'd love to take you to Gilgo Beach late at night. You would never want to leave and you could stay there forever. I'm like, wait, Gilgo Beach? You couldn't have said any other beaches? You understand why that seems a bit concerning, right? Hoping he was joking. He said, well, if you don't want to go willingly, it won't be as beautiful. Meanwhile, I'm searching on Bumble to report him and he's deleted his account, so I blocked him. This was just last week, so yay for online dating. Story 42. I politely rejected a man's advances. After pressing me, I blurted out, look, I'm gay. Jokingly added that he was barking up the wrong tree. He kept harping on about the fact that lesbianism was a figment of my imagination, and if given the chance, he could remove it from me. Not even screw it out of me, which is what I've heard before, but he specifically said remove it. He was in the medical field, ironically enough, so it definitely scared the crap out of me. It was giving underground lobotomy vibes. Story 43. I have a new manager that keeps doing this weird thing. He's like a pathological liar or something, and keeps claiming he did things other people did. But he gets mixed up, and will tell you to your face he did something that you yourself did or said. Like a few hours before I spent the morning rearranging something, and when he started up a conversation with me, he said he took the morning to rearrange said area. Even though he wasn't there, it's starting to wig me out, not on the levels of these stories, and probably not a psychopath, but it's really strange how he seems to believe himself. Story 44. I had always looked at it as an embellishment, big fish quirk thing, but the way my dad could lie so easily and efficiently about literally anything. I came home once to help him with some renovations they were doing. He told me to grab something from his office. There was a calendar with a chemo schedule on it. I asked if he had cancer and he said no. I asked again. No, why would you think so? I saw a chemo schedule in your office. Yeah, I got cancer. Pretty much lied about everything. A lot of other big things. I eventually got off contact. Started talking to him again about 6 months before he died. Regret doing so. Found out a lot more serious lies after he died. Screw him. Story 45. I'm a 16-year-old male and my stepsis is 11. She once came home with a boy and I asked who he was. She told me to shut up. They went in the room to play with my monitor and I gave them my Steam password. I was watching the TV in the living room and I heard her scream in terror. I ran into the room and he was on top of her doing, you know. I jump kicked him and beat him up. I asked why he did that, and she was crying and saying that he wanted to know what it was like. I never let her near a boy without knowing his intentions first after that. Story 46. Was getting to know brother-in-law's new girlfriend at family dinner. Told me she was the youngest of 4 girls. Showed me an M tattoo on her wrist because all their names/nicknames started with M. At another gathering, she told a family cousin she was the youngest and had 3 older brothers. Was hanging out with the cousin a few weeks later, and obviously we were both like, what the hell? Also turns out this girl is an only child, so even weirder. So many red flags, but brother-in-law was smitten. Over the years, we figured out she was just a pathological liar, and so was her mom. They would both tell lie after lie, then lies to cover up the lies that didn't add up. Family was too polite/puzzled at first, and then eventually just tired of her crap. We tried to talk brother-in-law out of the relationship, showing him evidence of how all her stories were simply not true, but he wasn't having any of it. They ended up married, she was a nasty bridezilla as well, had a child, and are now divorced. Story 47. Just some guy in my hometown. While walking our dog, she was attacked by another dog, and its owner was just standing there smirking until I chased his dog away. I reported it, and the dog was put down because it had also tried to attack children who were sitting in a car. Our dog luckily wasn't hurt too severely, but she did have a fear whenever we encountered big dogs after that. Ironically, it was another big dog who cured her of that. Anyway, I later learned that they found burn marks on the dog because apparently its owner put out their cigarettes on it. Being able to do stuff like that to an animal, disgusting behavior. You pretty much have to be a psychopath to do that and not think anything of it. I mean, to humans too. But for some reason it feels even crueler to an animal, which is probably stupid now that I think about it. But it does. Story 48. I was working in a homeless shelter and some big lump with black eyes barricaded the door, sat opposite to me, told me how easy it would be for him to murder me. This went on for 15 minutes. Somebody kicked the door in at some point and he snapped out of it. He was definitely a psychopath. There wasn't any light in him at all. Found out from his records the following day that he'd done 10 years in a South African jail for butchering his neighbor and burying him in his own garden. Story 49. I was at a bus stop one sunny day a few years ago heading into town. One of the very few other people at the stop was a young man with dark hair. He caught my attention when he made a passing comment to me about how unpredictable the buses could be. I turned my head to smile and acknowledge it. I won't soon forget his face. He was smiling at me, but it was a really intense grin. What horror writers call a rictus. His eyes looked darkly intense, and when he smiled, you could see all of his teeth. I'm a big guy, several inches taller, and likely much stronger than him. But there was something about his gaze and his intense facial expression that I found very unsettling. It was like I was looking at a mask, and as if I knew that his quip and broad grin completely belied his actual emotional state and his actual pleasantness. I disengaged from the exchange as fast as I was able to, and didn't do anything to draw attention to myself again. I never met that guy before, and I haven't seen him since and have no wish to. I don't know what his issue was, if he had a disorder of some kind, or was coming down from some wild drug bender, but that day I caught a glimpse of something that every fiber of my intuition was telling me was a very dangerous man. If I were told that one person I'd met in my life was actually an alien in disguise and I had to guess who, that guy would be near the top of a very, very short list. Story 50. My stepbrother. The first time he met our family, he completely ripped and tortured my cousin's baby doll. He was about 8, I think. My dad and stepmom used to watch movies with us that just shouldn't be watched in front of kids. We watched The Butterfly Effect, and the entire time, I was thinking how the girl's brother reminded me of him. I caught him trying to beat our dog with a tennis racket, and when I flipped out, he started coming after me, but didn't realize my dad was watching out of the window and intervened. The last time I really talked to him, he was being a complete jerk, and I just asked him how he's not in prison yet, which my dad said I was out of line for saying. He went to prison a couple years later for holding his girlfriend hostage and torturing her for an entire week before she was able to escape and get help. Story 51. A friend of mine got assaulted by a male friend of hers. The assaulter's best friend, let's call him Dongweed, kept harassing the victim in person and on Twitter, saying she made it up, or if she didn't, she wanted it anyway. I learned a long time ago that you can't present yourself as defending someone who's being bullied, because the jerk will keep up the harassment knowing he is now upsetting 2 people. So I just DM'd him and asked him why he's such an idiot. He started tweeting about me, and my friend called me and said, "OP, you can't mess with that Dongweed guy. He's a literal sociopath. He went to jail for drugging his mom and dad because they wouldn't let him go to a party. She shouldn't have told me that. Another diagnosed sociopath that I grew up with almost beat 2 of my best friends to death. We ruined his life. Sociopaths don't scare me. They need you to fear them. So I doubled down and made fun of him for drugging his parents. Then he tried to get me fired from my job. Story 52. Had issues with this girl in school. There was a misunderstanding that triggered her hatred of me. Someone said I called her a name, but I didn't, and I tried to explain to her, but it was no use. Ended up in an altercation after months of harassment, drama, and literally being stalked. I thought it was over, but 3 years after graduation, she happened to see me out. She followed me in her car all the way home, cornered me, threatened to, quote, splatter my brains on the concrete, hoping I died before her so she could pee on my grave, and told me she better never catch me out again. This all was over something so minor and years ago. She's a nurse now. I truly am concerned what would happen if I ever ended up in her care. Absolutely unhinged. Story 53. My brother, absolutely psycho and sociopathic. Manipulative, abusive, uncaring for humans or animals, egotistical behavior, enjoys inflicting pain on others. When we were little, I knew he wasn't right. We didn't have language or words to describe it though. It took my mom several decades to finally cut ties with him. We had an older brother die at 14 from taking his own life. My idiot brother used that to his advantage toward my mom to get whatever he wanted. She ended up finally saying no to him about 10 years ago. Now he's trying to wiggle his way into our lives. A no-contact order won't keep him away. He hurt us for entertainment. He has a darkness in him I can't explain. Story 54. When I got into the car with the guy I was newly seeing, it all started fine, until he began asking odd hypotheticals like, how fast do you think we'd have to be driving to die on impact if we were to hit that pole? And as we would pass any tree, he started commenting on the size of them, and would rate it out of 10 in terms of how good it would be on the die on impact scale. I'm always down for a good hypothetical, but his cold, emotionless stare and the escalating excitement in his voice as he found a good tree and talked about the prospect of us dying definitely rang my, oh crap, this person is a psychopath and I'm stuck in a car with them vibes. Story 55. I once met a woman who just so happened to be in a polyamorous relationship. I don't judge. My boyfriend at the time, we'll call him Jake, and her husband both got along well, so we all became friends. The dynamic wasn't any different than any other platonic friendship between two couples, but do note, she was a psychologist. Her profession comes into play later in the story. After about a month of doing totally normal friendship things, we were all at a huge Halloween party, and Jake and her husband were chilling on the couch across the large room when she told me, Jake adores you. You mean so much to him, and I just think your bond is so special. I looked at Jake from across the room, gave him a wink, blew him a kiss, and continued mingling with people as she casually walked back to Jake and her husband. The next thing I know, her husband is walking over to me and throwing himself at me, while she's straddling Jake on the couch. Appalled and in shock of what was going on, I kept trying to break away from her husband and make my way over to the couch, but he was holding me back, and I struggled to break free from what became him assaulting me in a corner. I later found out that when she walked back to Jake after I blew him that kiss and winked at him from across the room, she had told him/her husband I was okay with trying swinging, but just once for Halloween. Her moving on to Jake plus her husband moving on to me was both swift and forceful. It happened so fast and the atmosphere didn't allow for an immediate clean breakaway. There's no doubt in my mind they planned this, and needless to say, we never spoke again. I also broke up with Jake. Furthermore, I found out that this psycho is working in a marriage counseling/mental health practice, specializing in abuse and trauma. She's out there creating the problem that people go to her to help fix. Insane. Story 56. I was in therapy, decided to tell my therapist about an event in my life where I'd been abused. Her answer was, but you wanted it, didn't you? And then I saw the smile that she couldn't hide after saying it. It was a pleasured smile. Her face was evil and her smile was creepy. It was hard to detect, but I could feel it. She was having a blast mentally torturing me. Later in that same session, she told me to take my own life and that all my problems were my fault. I regretted not recording the whole thing. 2 therapists in a row who are just the worst people on earth? What is happening? How did these people even find themselves in that profession? Truly horrifying, and I'm so sorry to both this OP and the last, and, well, really everyone in here, I think. Story 57. Was dating a girl for like a month. She said her friends were having a party and she wanted to introduce me to them. I said sure, we went to their house. I didn't care, it wasn't a fancy house or anything. Everyone seemed chill, but a little wild. like it was a loud party, and I'd been to raves before, and way more rap than I'd ever heard. I stuck out like a sore thumb in cargo shorts and a polo surrounded by all these people with sagged pants and red bandanas. But it was fine, no one was being a jerk, so whatever. The problem occurred like 2 hours in when they all started beating the ever-living crap out of some guy. Everyone got a few hits and kicks in, like an absolute beating. Stopped drinking immediately just in case and was on way high alert. The guy didn't even leave. He stayed and everyone laughed and drank and congratulated him. I'd witnessed a beat into a gang and noped the hell out when she told me. Well, when it comes to meeting her friends, you do get the vibe immediately from that, so a decent vetting process at the very least. Beneficial for you, OP, for her to show that so early on, so you can get out of there and not waste any more time. Story 58. When my husband's ex-best friend would secretly record his one-night stands and showed everyone at work. We were in the army. Mind you, this man had about 4 to 7 different women a week. One time we came over to his place, he was with a girl. Then we left and came back that same night, he was with a different girl. He would also drug his dog for fun. Dog is with ex-girlfriend now. Oh, and he cheated on his 3-year girlfriend the entire relationship with the females in our unit. GF was also our coworker. Met her family. Her dad loved him, but little did they know. I could go on about this guy. He's under investigation now. Story 59. When I got into the first couple art classes in second year of high school, there was a girl who had the same niche interests as me, that in my country aren't very popular. We had a couple classes sitting and chatting together, and I noticed she was really entering my private space and pushing boundaries. I'm a person with very open boundaries, so I didn't bat an eye and was chill about it. After we exchanged Twitter pages, hers was private, I found out she is the bad type of quiet kid. Her full page was blasting with art, fanfiction, and love to several real-life serial murderers, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, etc. I got creeped out, unfollowed her immediately, and for the rest of high school I tried to be cold but polite. There were another couple of strange and worrying stories with her, so I guess it's good that we didn't become friends. Though, it's a pity. She was the only person in real life that I know that was into the same fandom as me. Story 60. I was playing a game with a friend and asked to pause it so I could phone a family friend because today was his chemo and we had scheduled a call. His eyes went all black like a shark. His blue eyes turned black. He just said, "I don't care." Not, "I don't care" as in it doesn't matter if we pause the game. I don't care as in, please, don't even bother to explain the reason. Nothing about your family life interests me. At the time, I didn't need him to care. We were just friends. But the whole coldness of his manner and his jet black eyes freaked me the hell out. I went into another room, held it together for the call, and then had a panic attack thinking about going back into the room with that person who I didn't even recognize anymore. I had goosebumps, cold sweats, the whole deal. In the end, I realized I had to go back because my bag and car keys were in there with him. So I went in, finished playing, and smiled and acted like nothing was wrong. Over time, I convinced myself it had been my imagination, and we got closer. He pushed for a relationship, and there followed the most textbook cycle of love bombing, followed by every type of abuse you can think of. Rinse and repeat. I eventually ran away from him by literally fleeing the country. No real point to this, but if someone gives you the major creeps, it's not in your head, and your body's reacting to cues that you've registered in your subconscious. Don't rationalize, don't wait for a bigger sign, don't rethink, don't ask for a second opinion. Run. Story 61. A guy tried to stab my ex-boyfriend in the shoulder because he went to grab him and cut his hand on my ex's punk vest spikes. They'd known each other for years, but it was my first time meeting him. They weren't friends, but shared friends, and my ex always tried to avoid house parties with him because he was always screwed up and looking for a fight. My ex was mad, but luckily his leather jacket took the brunt of it. That guy died later from a heart attack brought on in an OD a few years later. I've had other experiences too, like more casual ones. Like the guy who didn't like that I turned him down at a bonfire and made a joke about tossing me in the river with, quote, all the other native women. Thinking over it, these moments have been predominantly situations with men. I've met some really rough and weird guys over my life, mostly at house parties and passing. Story 62. I've been a psychopath as long as I remember, and every now and then I can spot them in public. I can't really explain it all that well, but it's largely their expressions. I can tell when they're faking it the same way I do. Normally, it's not anything scary, just me recognizing another one. But this one time when I was visiting relatives on the other side of the country that we didn't see much, I met up with a friend of an aunt in a parking lot when we were heading somewhere else, and this guy she was with immediately stood out as bad news, even though nobody else reacted. The thing you have to know is that most of us are fine. We lack empathy, but that's more or less the extent of it. This guy was not just that. This guy was big, standing over my aunt and acting friendly. However, while he had the usual tells of a psychopath, I could tell from his gaze his intentions were just bad. Guy will probably be a serial murderer someday in my opinion, and maybe already had taken a life before then. He was faking it like the rest of us, but there was an intent behind it that terrified me. I stood as far away as I could from him, and got back in the car as soon as I could. The family I was with had no idea why I acted the way I did. I had no idea how to tell them this guy was a psychopath that was not just a living off instincts and desires like the rest of us. He had something about him that was truly evil. That being said, it would be hard to explain it to people in general, so there's not much I can do about it. I've never felt that way about anyone else though, and it still freaks me out a little thinking about it. You know, it's interesting to think about that. As a psychopath, you can probably tell when someone has some real bad intentions a lot easier. Because if you are masking all the time, as OP mentioned, it's easier to tell when other people are too. And it probably also is easier to tell when someone's just not quite right about it. As they said, they could tell the man's intentions, and I'm inclined to believe them. That being said, I get why it's almost impossible to bring up. Like, how do you convince people of that? They're just not gonna believe you. Anyway, that was our last story for today. I'd like to thank you all very much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.